Are you ready for a show that talks sports from the fans' point of view?
We've seen Michael Jordan score 37 points a game in his era. How many could he score in today's NBA?
There's not a player out there who I'd rather have than LeBron James.
Are you ready for a show that isn't afraid to challenge anyone when it comes to sports? If Adam Silver really wanted to fix tanking in the NBA, he would stop rewarding teams by giving them the best chance to win the draft lottery.
I mean, how many times will Roger Goodell drop the ball on handling domestic violence in the NFL?
Look, athletes have every right to talk politics, but if the fans stop tuning in, that's their right.
Then you're ready for Talk Back, a podcast where two fans debate the media narrative and discuss the world of sports as we see it.
Welcome to the show.
Welcome to another edition of Talk Back. I'm one of your hosts, Eric Nesbit, and with me is Justin Gay, your director of content, hitting the biggest talk-worthy events in sports. We've got Myles Garrett and company putting on a show with 5 seconds left in the Browns-Steelers game. Colin Kaepernick working out for his fans, apparently. And then Tua suffering a huge injury that sends shockwaves across the league. You're listening to episode 310 of Talk Back.
We are back, Eric. We've been off for a couple weeks, but we had to come back this week because there is a lot of news to discuss and basically three main stories that we want to hit this week on the show that's probably going to run us from start to finish because they are dominating the world of sports and they're still in the news because as we record this episode, Mr. Myles Garrett took a trip to New York to appeal his indefinite suspension, Eric, because he pulled off a pretty unprecedented move in that he nearly broke Twitter on Thursday night. So I don't even know how many people actually saw this happen live because it was such a horrific Thursday night football game. I believe the Steelers offense is the new version of Ambien because it ran a lot of people to bed and put them to sleep. That was a pathetic performance. But with 8 seconds left in this game, all hell breaks loose. Our listeners have all seen this by now, the Myles Garrett helmet swing. But Eric, I got to ask you this right off the bat because the biggest thing to me that came out of this was the fact that what I saw was Myles Garrett hit another player in the head with his own helmet, and somehow it turned into Myles Garrett should have been joined by Mason Rudolph today, who should have been appealing his own suspension. So which side of this do you sit on? Was this something Mason Rudolph actually started, or should Myles Garrett be carrying all the blame on this?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because, as you mentioned on Twitter, I mean, I'm with you. At the end of that game, I was starting to flip channels. I was actually just fortunate to catch the end of this and what happened because I was getting ready to go to bed. I was flipping through channels. I was really losing interest in this game. And I just happened to be on the game and back over to Thursday night football, rather. I was wishing it was Monday already, but I was back over to Thursday night football thinking, when is this going to end? And then all of a sudden I see Myles Garrett sort of extending the play, if you will, taking Mason Rudolph down and just seemingly laying on top of him at that point, like they're in a wrestling match. Yeah, Mason Rudolph goes for the helmet and starts kicking and trying to get the man off of him. And at that point, it just extends. And now you've got two guys that are going after each other. I really wouldn't have said one fault or another at that point. If it had ended right there, I think nothing really even comes of this. No player is suspended. They both had a little bit of fault in it, but then it goes to the next level, obviously, in what you said, which is an unprecedented event where, yes, Myles Garrett had Mason Rudolph's helmet and clocks him with it. And I'm just a couple things going through my head here, Justin. One, I'm really glad, and I know a lot of people have said this. I know Damian Woody and SVP were talking about it pretty much on the Sports Center right after the game, and Damian Woody was really angry about this because he was saying that if he had happened to hit him with the crown of the helmet, and as much as one of those helmets weighs, rather than just a glancing blow with sort of the padded ear hole of the helmet, and it's just fortunate that it worked out that way, but I mean, he really legitimately could have cracked Mason Rudolph's head open at that point. I mean, he could have put a big gash in it. He could have knocked him out. And even worse, had he hit him in the temple or something, I mean, he could have really been deadly. So, yeah, Justin, I mean, I think this whole talk about, well, Mason Rudolph is culpable in the end result of this whole thing. I mean, get a grip, people. If we want to go down that talk track, it's just asinine. It's just completely ridiculous. Yes, I know that Mason Rudolph kind of put a foot up in his balls at some point when the man is laying on top of him. And yes, I realize Mason Rudolph is sort of scrapping and reaching for the back of Garrett's helmet during that melee on the ground, but the ball was already gone when Garrett takes him to the ground 2 seconds, 3 seconds after the play is over. At that point, I don't care that Mason Rudolph is grabbing for his helmet because they're scrapping at that point. You're just trying to get the man off you, Justin.
That was my biggest thing that I kept putting on Twitter with these people saying, I don't believe they even watched how this started. It's like they thought it just started with two guys laying on top of each other. Well, how do you think they got there? Let's go back to the Ray Rice incident. How do you think his fiance was laying knocked out in an elevator? Do you think she slipped on a banana peel like a cartoon?
She was tired.
Yeah.
She was tired.
She decided to take a nap. That's how Twitter would make you feel. No, this was 8 seconds to go in a game. Mason Rudolph's trying to throw a screen pass. As soon as he lets the ball go, Myles Garrett makes contact with him, and then nearly 2.5 seconds go by. And if you want, go back and watch the replay and get your iPad watching the game and get your iPhone out with the clock and tape it or check the timer if you don't believe me. But it's about 2.5 seconds that he Greco-Roman wrestles him, and he finally throws him on the ground and throws Mason Rudolph on his head. And it irritated Mason Rudolph, and he even said so on Monday in a press conference. That
he should have been, right?
Yeah,
he should have been mad.
And look, one of the lasting images this year of the league is Mason Rudolph without a face mask on his helmet with no earthly idea where the hell he is after that hit in that Baltimore game. So this is a guy already that probably is pretty sensitive to taking shots and getting thrown on his head. They start to scrap. He tries to get the helmet off. Myles Garrett then picks him up by his face mask and rips his helmet off his head. So right there in my mind, Eric, it's pretty much Myles Garrett is still the aggressor at that point. Yeah. He's thrown him on his head. He couldn't get his helmet. He still has his helmet on, and he's ripped Mason Rudolph's helmet off. So even at that point, if they stop, Myles Garrett is already crossed the line at that point, because how many quarterbacks have we seen their helmets get ripped off in a game? It doesn't happen very often. In fact, if you think back to the Dallas Giants, a primetime game of a couple weeks ago, Daniel Jones got hit on the sideline a little bit late. And there was several fights that broke out after that point. So you start to think about a quarterback getting their helmet ripped off. There's going to be a lot of emotions at that point. And then that's where it gets frustrating to me, watching and listening to people on Twitter and watching all this stuff on TV, as people that are just blaming. And it's society, Eric. It's just, we have to blame someone else even when the culprit is standing right in front of us. It's like, well, he really isn't at fault. I mean, this was the perfect story to me to explain why our country is in the position it is, because 10 people could have watched this play and somehow 4 or 5 of them would have had a completely different opinion than the other 4 or 5. And to me, Eric, it was pretty cut and dry of what happened. And yet somehow this gets thrown into Mason Rudolph should be held accountable. Did he charge after him? Yes. Did he get his helmet ripped off of his head? Yeah, he's probably going to be a little bit frustrated at that point. And Myles Garrett, Eric, this was a guy a few weeks ago, wasn't it? Was talking on Twitter about the fact that a random fan asked him for a selfie and then punches him in the face and he does nothing to it. And then he's the same guy that's taking a helmet to Mason Rudolph's noggin. And to your point, if he hits him with any other part of that helmet, especially the top of it, I mean, maybe best case, he probably knocks him out on the field. Worst case, who knows what happens at that point? I mean, the thing weighs, 6 pounds? I think I saw on a brick weighs 5 pounds. So just imagine that getting swung down at the force that it did. So I can't put any of this on Mason Rudolph at all. I believe Myles Garrett is the aggressor. I believe the NFL validates that point for the fact that he has an indefinite suspension. And we don't know when he's coming back and why he's in New York trying to appeal this, because what other rules are out there to really set the parameters for this? We really haven't seen anything like this. I mean, I know Antonio Smith ripped Richie Incognito's helmet off and tried to whack him in the head with it, but I mean, those are two linemen and Incognito's involved. So who knows what he had been doing throughout the game, but the league just hasn't had to deal with really anything like this to try to figure out what to do. You had the Hainsworth thing with Gerard. Is that this worse than that? Was that premeditated? I don't know, Eric, but I just feel like it's ridiculous to try to throw this on Mason Rudolph. This was a Myles Garrett issue. And furthermore, Eric, this is a Browns issue. This is a team that has played with no discipline the entire year.
None at all.
And what Myles Garrett has $50,000 in fines, right? One of them for punching Delaney Walker. Another one of those hits came on a hit that ended Trevor Simeon's year.
Yeah.
By breaking his ankle. And that was another primetime game. So to me, Eric, this is Brown's dysfunction. And it just came out at a time when this team has a legit chance to do something still. With a season that looked like 2 weeks ago, it was down the toilet. This team has a schedule that allows the Browns to have some kind of hope to salvage this. And now their best player is, I can't see him playing in a Browns uniform this year. Maybe next year, maybe it's 6 games, but he screwed up the Browns' chances, Eric, to fix what had been a lost season at this point.
Yeah, and you have guys like Max Kellerman, right, who are basically waving.
How's that guy on TV?
Well, because he's on first fake, right? I mean, he's waving the flag of Rudolph started it. He should be suspended. Let me tell you something, Max Kellerman. If there's two guys in an alley and they both have guns, but one is not loaded, he's just carrying it to, basically be a bully and be a show off. The other one is carrying it and has it loaded, and they point them at each other. And the first one, let's say he's waving it around or whatever, doesn't actually do anything. The second one's waving it around, pulls the trigger and kills the other guy. That's murder. That's still murder. You can say, yeah, he was provoked, he was whatever, but one did more than the other. And in this case, I'm sorry, but the guy is laying on top of you and you're just trying to grab the back of his helmet. He didn't even grab the face mask. He was grabbing the back edge of the helmet. And I just don't understand how you can look at this when Garrett literally grabs him by the face mask and lifts him off the ground until his helmet comes off, that of course Rudolph's going to charge after him and carry it on. Now, Justin, I want to kind of take this to a different place too. It's all part of the same conversation, but some of the suspensions that I was the most upset about, and I think what we're going to eventually see is that Garrett, and I've actually been reading about it today, as I'm sure you have, is that the CBA doesn't really allow for indefinite suspension. So I think one of the biggest reasons that Garrett is there presenting his own case in the appeal today, and we're recording this here on Wednesday night, is because they've got to put a number on it. And so I think at the end of the day, when we find out later this week, when the pod drops, we'll tweet out and we'll put a number we'll put an update on what the number is. But I think they're ultimately going to have to put, let's say the whole season, the rest of the 6 games he's done. And then he can come back.
And potential postseason too, I think.
Well, for sure. The rest of this year, let's say, all games, the rest of 2019, 2020. And then next year he can come back. He can participate in preseason and everything else. I think that's eventually what it's going to come down to. Howie Long, Michael Strahan, even Dominic Foxworth. If you're looking for some of these sports shows and listening to the talking heads, all of them are talking about that this guy, is a very nice guy. He does a lot for the community. It's a suspension that should be reduced because it doesn't define who he is as a person. It's a moment in time, a lapse in judgment, a brain fart, some want to call it. Okay, I can get behind all of that because I think even what Mike Pouncey did was a brain fart. He's just defending his quarterback. He's defending the situation. I think Mike Pouncey's suspension is too long, in my opinion. The guy that made me the most mad is Ogunjobi. How is that guy, and his suspension was actually upheld today, but only at 1 game. How is that guy only getting 1 game for what, Louis Riddick was calling basically a cowardly cheap shot? He, the play is beyond over. This even situation is over. The helmet has already been swung at this point. Mason Rudolph is actually back up on his feet. And then Ogunjobi runs down the field and absolutely levels Mason Rudolph and gets 1 game for that. Justin, react to that, because to me, I would have preferred, and I tweeted this out, I would have preferred Garrett the rest of the season, Ogunjobi was the one that should have got 3 or 4 games. Pouncey